Welcome back, everybody, into Bill's Chat. I am Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luca. Luca, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good. I mean, we are what's the word here? We are deep into the season when it comes to NCAA dynasty mode. Oh no, we're talking about NFL here. Yeah, no, we are now a week into the training camp schedule here, and that's also exciting. But in all reality, it's still a great summertime. Everyone, hopefully you're enjoying yourself out there. I know I'm enjoying myself. Obviously, I mentioned college football 25 that has consumed a good amount of my time when it comes to just enjoying something this summer. When inside, when outside, it's still beautiful, getting in plenty of golf, all that stuff. But Josh, it's Sunday night as we normally record. We're about to talk about Bills football, and I always love being behind the camera talking to you about that kind of stuff.
And football is in the air. You mentioned NCAA. Madden's right around the corner. So for the gamers out there, I know fantasy drafts are coming up. It's got to be on your radar soon. I mean, it's August this coming week. That's when fantasy drafts really ramp up. And the Bills, Luca, will have their pads on for the first time on Monday. They have 4 practices in the books already. And we're going to talk about everything that's transpired at training camp, the top stories, our key takeaways. We got some feedback from some followers on Twitter from what their biggest stories are. But you know what, Luca? You and I were chatting earlier this week, and I just find it interesting that for an offseason that saw the Bills get rid of so many big names, Stephon Diggs, Mitch Morse, Gabe Davis, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White, you all know the names. It's almost like there's no real big story this camp. There's obviously not like a big quarterback battle. There's not like last year where it's like we have this really important position on defense, middle linebacker, and we have no idea who's going to take that job. Like every day you're trying to see who's getting the reps in. I guess to some extent, maybe that's going on with safety, but I feel like all 4 of those guys at least bring a different element of confidence with them. And it just does feel like, despite all the change, the 2 new coordinators, the fun rookies that we're going to talk about, I don't know. It's kind of like ho hum storyline wise.
And I'd kind of to add on to that, when I remember you brought it up, what if that conversation kind of spurred from realistically, what are we going to do with this episode? Obviously, camp starts, but it's not like something that we're going to sit here and spend over an hour of time kind of to discuss. And I even phrased it to you where it's like, that's almost a question in its own right. Is it a good thing? Is it bad? Where does it stand? And it's in my answer to it is really it's refreshing. It's different where there's almost a kind of unknown that gives you or gives myself a little bit of excitement in the sense of it does make these reports and these interviews coming out from the media and things like that interesting. We're getting people like Mac Hollins, who I'm just going to highlight first because I have enjoyed his conversation with the media the absolute most so far. But then you're getting, your Keon Coleman in front of the mic, Curtis Samuel, we heard about or heard from earlier this week, while also still having your steadies like Matt Milano, Dawson Knox, individuals, Josh Allen, of course, individuals like that are behind the mic answering questions. But it's refreshing in a positive way. And I do also enjoy that we are sitting comfortably across the board for the most part. Like there is that question about safety, but you're not really hearing about a position battle. It's just kind of working its course. There's no concerns. You don't have a ton of beat reporters really highlighting anything about it. And I think in a weird way, that's a good thing because it's not like there's any negative kind of notes coming out of it. Whereas in camp, it felt like last year with the middle linebacker, the Mike position, that it as the days were progressing, it was almost becoming more and more like someone was going to win that by default rather than someone standing out. And you don't like hearing that kind of stuff. And it worked out that way through preseason. And also, luckily for all of us, Terrell Bernard just got handed the job coming off injury, and it worked out in spades for everyone. And just somehow it fell into our lap that we found our Mike without him even really sniffing the preseason. So it's one of those things where looking back at that, understanding where we were last year at that time, not hearing about those things this year, not thinking that there's any position battles really to be concerned with. You just get to enjoy the reports that are coming out, day after day. And then just, it even adds to the interest of all of these media times that you see your Matt Collins, Keon Coleman's, Josh Allen's, just to hear what they have to say more so. Whereas it felt like years past, the questions were regular and consistent and the same. Josh Allen has to answer questions about Diggs. How are they doing on their relationship? Vice versa with Diggs, and how's Diggs feeling about the place? And then that would even bleed into the conversations with McDermott, with Morse, with anyone else. And it's not the same old thing anymore. It's kind of fresh takes, fresh looks. You're getting questions for about 4 minutes about why a guy is barefoot out there day in, day out and walking through the facilities and training barefoot and stuff like that. Just makes it fun and different and give a positive and different vibe to this team that I think it desperately needed. So no position battles plus all of that. I think this is fantastic coming out of the first week of training camp.
It is interesting because for the last few years, the hype around the Bills, I think peaking after the 2021 playoff game against Kansas City, 13 seconds, where it really felt like the Bills were within an eyelash of winning a Super Bowl, and that entire offseason where they signed Von Miller. It just felt like they were the team to beat. There's that famous shot of all the experts picking the Bills to win the Super Bowl. From that moment on, every camp to me, it's felt like the Bills were tight. And I don't mean tight in a good way, like best friends. I mean tight, like uptight. And I felt like you could see that in McDermott. And it felt like that the tension was there. And they knew that every season that went by without getting a Super Bowl was just like this huge, huge letdown, which I still think there is some of that. But there seems to be a relaxed nature about this team in a good way. And I like it. I'm digging it. And I don't mean digging it to be cute because of Stephon Diggs, but I'm enjoying the freedom it feels like this team is playing with. And I'm enjoying what seems to be a more relaxed Sean McDermott whenever he's at the podium. Another thing that's going really well for the Bills so far through Camp Luca is health. They started training camp with an unbelievable full roster practicing. Nobody was put on any of the various injury lists. And, as camp has gone on, there's been some, minor bumps here and there. Like Will Clapp had an injury today that, we'll see how long it's going to keep him out for. It could impact what we're talking about, a backup offensive line battle with Alec Anderson. Some other injuries that have popped up. Mike Edwards he missed a lot of the spring. He missed a little bit of practice time today. Nick Murrow maybe has a hamstring injury, banged up. Bills posted about that. Otherwise, it's been great. And, knock on wood, knock on whatever, the Bills have been very fortunate. I think, because we put this question out on Twitter, we're going to get to some follower questions down the line. What's the biggest thing on your mind right now when it comes to the Bills? And I'll tell you, with all the praise that Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid are getting, and I'm here for it, and all the praise that rookies like I already mentioned Coleman, but like Ray Davis and Cole Bishop are getting, or you'll get the occasional big play from Mac Hollins, or you'll have the day where Curtis Samuel dominates. To me, that's just training camp. I'm not going to get overly excited about it. I don't know how to quantify what that's actually going to mean when the season starts, because we've seen it come time and time again where guys do great in training camp. It doesn't necessarily translate to the regular season. You hope it does. One thing I feel that I do know is that a healthy Matt Milano has a very, very high value to this team. And that's where my head's at, Luca, with my number one thought on this team is I know Matt Milano's out there practicing. I know Sean McDermott said that he'd be out there with no limitations, but they would monitor him as camp is going on. But I am concerned that the reporting is that while he's out there, we are not seeing vintage Matt Milano when it comes to coverage and movement. And maybe that's to be expected. You even said that would be your prediction, that he would play, but it would be kind of rough around the edges. Luca, is your concern level, has it gone up since these practices have started and now we've seen the proof in the pudding that Matt Milano is not fully back? Or is this just kind of, hey, this is what I expected, so I'm not panicking? Where are you at with Matt Milano?
Absolute baseline. It's exactly, I'm not shocked. I don't think it's also any level of concern. I would say moderately concerned, as I expected to be. That's kind of the tidbit I'd have with it. The bottom line is Matt Milano hasn't played football in a long time. He had that injury that he had. And this could probably equate to, not being able to do his full offseason workout like he typically had in seasons past, plus needing to rehab what he had, plus being rusty. Like, you add all of those things together, and you probably get exactly what we're seeing right now when it comes to not being fluid in coverage, not being that same all pro, linebacker that we expect out of him. But I'm okay with that because it's not like Matt Milano is Adrian Peterson, as in superhuman, and we can expect something like that out of him. I've talked about that before. I think that was something I mentioned essentially last week. This isn't any level of concern that I didn't expect to be at this point. And we talked about it as well, where it's like they also did their due diligence in making sure they had backup plans for if this were to be the case. If Matt Milano continues at this projection, and McDermott's monitoring it as he says he is, and he's not feeling comfortable come week one that Milano's going to be the best answer at that spot in the defense, he has alternatives to go to. And that is the point of this. And that's okay too. Don't get Matt Milano rushed out there because you just don't have another answer to that question. You do have answers. Now you need to lean on that. That is what you need to do. Is Matt Milano at 75% health better than what you have back there? Potentially. Do you want to see him get to 85% before that matters? What is that line? That's something Sean McDermott has to figure out. That's something that, the coaching staff and training staff in general has to figure out. But until you see that, at least you have those reserves. At least you have that depth in that slot that you can kind of lean on and rely on moving forward. Like, what would be perfect? This is perfect world. Perfect world actually is Matt Milano just all of a sudden snaps out of it and he's perfect. But put that aside. Perfect world is Matt Milano is still just doing what he's doing. And then let's say preseason game one, Dorian Williams is showing a little bit more flash, like he's figuring it out. So it just gives that confidence to McDermott where he goes, hey, Matt, look, if you're not at 90+% and you're really not feeling it, we do have this kid here in Dorian Williams who, yes, he's not going to take your job permanently, but at least maybe we can get a week or two out of him while you get back to full health and recovery. So that come week 3, 4, whatever it is, especially after that initial condensed schedule that the Bills have come through weeks 1 and 2. If week 3 makes more sense after a little bit more rest, we can do that. And I think that's exactly what the Bills needed to do in the offseason. They addressed it perfectly. And here we are. This is exactly where I personally expected them to be with Matt Milano. And that's okay with me 100%.
You mentioned Dorian Williams. I find it interesting that so far through the first 4 practices that Dorian Williams and Balin Spector have been the direct backups to Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard. And even when Milano missed some time, you saw Balin Spector in that spot. This offseason, the Bills went out and got themselves some veteran insurance with Nicholas Morrow, Deion Jones. And I'm encouraged by the fact that the Bills are looking with their young guys in-house. We saw firsthand last year that a linebacker that had a rough rookie season can come in year 2 and dominate in Terrell Bernard. Who's to say that's not Dorian Williams? I think Balin Spector has flashed at times when he's gotten on the field. So I do find that interesting. And I'm with you. I do look at the way that season starts with the game against Arizona, out of conference game, and then 4 days later you're in Miami playing a tough road game. That's maybe the most important game on your schedule when you factor in division and all that. Does Matt Milano sit week 1 in anticipation of getting ready for week 2? And then his first game in X amount of time comes with basically a semi-bye after it before week 3. That might be the plan. And I would embrace that plan. And, the Bills do have a comfort in knowing that even if Matt Milano can't play, assuming health, knock on wood, that Terrell Bernard will be out there and the linebacker core should still be pretty decent. So yeah, we're sharing a brain on Matt Milano. Let's see what happens going forward. He's a very important player, just turned 30 years old. So you figure he still has some really strong football ahead of him. I think the other big story on the defensive side of the ball, Luca, right now is what I think is really the only starting job up for grabs. And that is the safety that is opposite Taylor Rapp. It sure seems like, even this offseason, it was like, okay, there's 4 safeties, 5 if you want to count D Delaney. 2 of them are going to emerge and start. But as the spring went on, you certainly got the vibes that Taylor Rapp was a cut above, and you start hearing stories about how he's kind of taken ownership of that DB group, and he's like the veteran in that room now, taking on that Hyde and Poyer role. Taylor Rapp's been with the first team exclusively. And Cover One was out there today, and Eric Turner made a comment saying he looks like he's in fantastic shape, looks like he's slimmed down, looks like he's got more juice in his step. And And now it comes down to who's starting opposite Taylor Rapp. And for the longest time, a lot of us thought that would be Mike Edwards. He's kind of the safe veteran. He read very similar to Micah Hyde when Micah Hyde was a free agent coming to Buffalo. You got to remember, Micah Hyde was not a household name before he got to Buffalo. He was just kind of like a good utility player in Green Bay. And that's what Mike Edwards has been at his various stops. But he was hurt in the spring and he didn't get a lot of work in there. And it was Damar Hamlin getting first team reps in the first practice. And I quickly put out a video on practice one recap. You can check out the daily recap videos on Bill's Chat YouTube. Don't read too much into this. I think this is a nod to Damar Hamlin. I think this is Sean McDermott saying, hey, Mike Edwards, you got to earn your spot. And as soon as practice two rolled around, Mike Edwards is in the starting lineup. But Luca, the most interesting thing to me, practice three, it wasn't back to Damar Hamlin. It was your guy, Cole Bishop. And Cole Bishop, by all accounts, made some splash plays, flashed the athleticism we read about dating back to Utah. And then practice number 4 today, it was Damar Hamlin with all those guys kind of rotating in. So it does feel like while the 10 other spots on defense, 11 if you want to count strong side linebacker, I don't. Taron Johnson, this is a nickel defense, are all set. The safety opposite Taylor Rapp is truly a 3-horse race. My hunch right now is it's a 2-horse race. I would be stunned is maybe a little too strong. I'd be very surprised if Damar Hamlin's the starter week 1. I just would. I think I would find that very surprising. I think in Mike Edwards, you have the fail-safe, the vet, and like you mentioned last week, if he's your backup safety, man, you're in great shape. If he's your starter, it's like, and then you have this super athletic, raw, high upside rookie that just you get a chance to learn under Bobby Babich and Sean McDermott, and that's exciting. True 3-horse race, true competition here. What do you make of the safety situation?
I will say, I actually do think it's a pretty open 3-horse race, just based on this early account. Now, I think that will bleed all the way through initial camp. That will lead itself into preseason, and I think that where we get to preseason game 1, just looking at the lineup, I think that will speak a lot. I think you have to treat this almost somewhat similar to how they treated the Mike position last year, where you just need to see who they come the first preseason game, which I think is home to Chicago, I want to say.
I'll get the schedule up here.
It's not like I'm memorizing preseason games here, Josh. You know, my interest in preseason, we all know, is well documented at a very high level.
Home to Chicago. See, in my mind, I always think of the red and blue scrimmage as a preseason game, and that's this coming Friday. And then the next, actually, all their preseason games are on Saturdays. They have Saturday home against the Bears.
It's good drinking. Those are good drinking days, Josh. It's like, give me a preseason afternoon game. That's why I can tolerate this stuff. So going to it, though, I do think Damar Hamlin getting the start on day 1 is something of noteworthiness. I will also say the offense was said to have been the better of the two sides come day 1. And then the defense answered day 2. The offense rebutted on day 3. And it's been a back and forth kind of every day. I think it was Tasker on One Bills Live said it pretty well. It's interesting to see where normally the defense has the upper hand early on because the offense has trying to figure out whatever they're trying to do, whether it's, complete playbook changes, scheme changes, personnel changes, whatever it is. There's a little bit more fine tuning and timing that has to happen with that. And the defense is just instilling more base package systems and stuff where they can get the upper hand in those early practices. But it's really been a back and forth, which is intriguing, especially considering what's going on with the offensive side, as well as there are those things like this safety position up for grabs on the defensive side that are pretty vital. I mean, the safety position in a Sean McDermott defense is a pretty important position. You've seen it with the years that were Hyde and Poyer locking that down, being the all pros on that kind of back line there that allowed the defense to play the way that they do. So all things there, I do believe it to be a 3-horse. I will add to it, though, based on what we're hearing, stuff like that, the Cole Bishop stuff is the most intriguing. The fact that he's really making a note for himself early is very, very promising. Now, come that first preseason game against Chicago, I'm not expecting him to be the starter, but I almost think that that's better because once you then go in with the 2s and 3s, that's when you can maybe make a name for yourself a little bit more so. That's when we saw going back to Terrell Bernard's rookie year, we saw him return a fumble six, almost got caught by an offensive guard. We don't have to bring that up. But that's when you see those things happen and you can at least establish yourself of like, okay, this is a guy who's got a nose for the ball. Okay, this is a guy who just figures it out against base level systems in the NFL, and you need to be known. And if McDermott sees something in that, that could elevate him enough where you are comfortable enough to keep him on game day rosters, because if you need him out there, he's going to do a job for you well enough, so on and so forth. It's one of those where I'm not suggesting that Cole Bishop would have never been active, but if they like DeMar Hamlin enough to put him out there day one in training camp and they're going to keep rotating him in, and then Mike Edwards has this injury knock on him, but it's not too severe, you could see a world where then maybe they do go with something like that just because Cole Bishop hasn't done enough to prove himself. I don't find that to be the case as well. I do side a little bit with where you're saying when it comes to the end of the day. We talked about who the surprise cut would be, and mine was quite literally DeMar Hamlin. But it, as of right now, where it stands, it's truly a 3-horse race. It's open, but there's still a lot of training camp, a lot of football to be played until that final cut has to happen, where, I think we'll start to see a separation where it will develop itself into kind of, these are the two, and this is your odd man out. That will happen at some point in time.
My one reservation about Cole Bishop, and you're going to have to learn eventually, the season is not friendly to it. It does not start friendly to a rookie safety. First off, you have Kyler Murray, who is just a pain in the ass for defensive backs because you can't help but keep an eye on him, peek on him, and see what he's up to in the backfield, because any given play, he can run 80 yards for a touchdown. And while you're peeking on him, the best wide receiver we've seen in the draft in a decade could be running behind your defense. So that's challenging. And then 4 days later, you go take on Mike McDaniel's offense with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, A-Chain, Tua, who just got paid. And again, pre-snap eye candy, you don't want to be wrong. You could see where the Bills might just be like, look, we love Cole Bishop, but this is not the spot we want to just drop him into.
Yeah.
So are you surprised that D. Delaney is not factoring into any of this?
No. Like, it is a surprise that he's not factoring whatsoever in really anything.
Yeah.
But it's not like I expected D. Delaney to have a real shot at the start. Like, I didn't expect D. Delaney to be like, this guy could truly be the starter opposite of Taylor Rapp. I looked at D. Delaney as kind of the insurance to backups. If Cole Bishop really is more raw than expected, if DeMar Hamlin is just not clicking on all cylinders, if Mike Edwards has an injury thing that lasts a little bit longer, if it lingers, then your D. Delaney insurance is just there for the backup spot and the backup role that's needed. That's what I felt like it was, similar to what I just said about the 3-horse race. It's still a lot of time. Things could happen. But it's not like I expected him to have a real say at the starting spot when it comes to safety.
He's more like the AJ Klein of safeties, where it's like you don't necessarily want him out there, but if you have a couple injuries, you don't feel awful. He's probably going to be the veteran practice squad safety.
A little disrespectful to him, but
yeah. He's the AJ Klein of safeties. That sounds awesome.
That's
because we know how good Klein was at linebacker. Let's talk about one last defensive topic before we move it to the offensive side. Dwayne Smoot. This is a guy that when the Bills signed him this offseason, we were intrigued by him. I think we took a look at his contract and we were like, oh, I mean, you look under the hood of it, this is a guy that they at least project to make the roster. But he's playing some significant time with the ones, and that's not nothing to me because we know that the Bills are going to rotate at least 4 heavy defensive ends. And you figure, assuming health, Greg Rousseau, Von Miller, and AJ Epinesa are going to be the primary 3, but that Shaq Lawson role is still up for grabs. And by all accounts, Luca, it's Dwayne Smoot's job. And you look at other guys on the back end of that depth chart, whether it's Elianku, Kingsley Jonathan, Javon Solomon, the rookie, not even sniffing the first team. Is this a situation where the 3 names I mentioned, it's really going to come down to one roster spot for those guys because Smoot's going to make the team?
It's starting to feel that. I do think, Javon Solomon has a pretty good shot at getting in on the 53. I really do believe that. I think he is something that's more unique than the rest, right? I think Javon Solomon and Von Miller are really truly your only. I mean, I'm putting Von Miller in that just for historical reasons, of course, but they're really your only like smaller, pass rush specialists. That's what they are. I think your Smoot, your Groot.
Smoot and Groot. Oh, that's gonna be fun.
Oh my goodness. I just rolled into that one so bad. Oh my God. Hold on. I gotta that was not intentional, people. Your Groot, your Smoot. I think Epinesa, you can definitely lean towards the pass rush specialist, but I'll put it this way. Your Smoot is kind of getting that Mario Addison type back on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what his role will be. And all things considered, or just however you want to remember Mario Addison, he was at least a reliable bookend that could at least seal that side, not really let too much get outside of him, primarily in the run game, of course. He's not pass rusher. You're not expecting him to get 10 plus sacks. You're not even expecting him probably to reach the 8 point on sacks. If he gets you a handful, fantastic. His job is to just be that reliable bookend that's not going to let stuff leak outside of him. And I think that's what you're getting in Smoot. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me because last year, I think they haven't had Addison now for 2-3 years, but last year, notably, when Von Miller was out, you had Groot, you had to bring back your Shaq Lawson to be that opposite guy, and Smoot's just a little bit of a bigger body to handle that role and will probably be able to handle it a little bit better than your Shaq Lawson. No disrespect to Shaq Lawson. He did in his own right. He did a great job. Like a lot of times he was our second best DN on that game, which doesn't say a whole heck of a lot for everyone else on that roster. Of course, you had your Epinesa game in London. You would have these other games here and there, but like at least you could rely on Shaq Lawson. I think that's what they're just going to ask for in Dwayne Smoot. And then, as you even have in our notes here, there's one more spot. You mentioned it as well. That's where, if you're looking at those four, Dwayne Smoot, not to name them in order because that's not the order it'll go, but Groot, Smoot, Von, and Epinesa. I'm going to say that all year.
They got to be together now.
Yeah, Groot and Smoot. Those are your run stopping DNs. That is exactly what they are, Josh. Groot and Smoot just sealing up those edges.
Very astute.
Oh God, that's great. Groot, Smoot, Von, and Epinesa. Those are your four. And if you look at that, what are you really wanting between Javon Solomon, Eli Anku, and Kingsley Jonathan? You want just another kind of specialist. And I think you're going to want to see what you get out of Javon Solomon. It's someone that others have had a keen eye just watching. He seems like someone, of course, he knows how to get to the quarterback based on what, you saw out of him in college last year. Did he lead the nation in sacks? I know he led his conference and everything. I wanted to say nation, but I wasn't confident enough to say it off the hip. I mean, he's a sack specialist. And that's what the Bills have needed for years and years now. That's why they signed Von when they did. And you were getting it until he tore his ACL on that wonderful turf in Detroit. So it's just, that makes a lot of sense. And good for Smoot. Good for Smoot for finding a place on a team where the marriage just seems to make sense if that's realistically what they want out of him in his role. Like it checks a lot of boxes in the kind of looking back at it. Oh yeah, that makes sense kind of category. It's like, oh yeah, like it was nice back in the day. Now we didn't have pass rushers at all, but it was nice back in the day when you had an Addison where you're like, at least I know no one's bouncing outside of him. Like no one, it was just reliably, nothing's getting outside of his reach and outside of his end. And that's fine.
Yeah, and I look at it, I'm with you. I think Javon Solomon's going to make the squad. I think the Bills are really going to try their best to keep all their rookies they drafted on the team. 10 may not make it, but the way these rookie contracts are, you can kind of see Bean's vision. There is a spot for all of these guys, and it's not too hard to get there with that. Real quick, I know I said that was the last defensive topic. Just want to mention this. We don't even really have to kick it around, but Kyer Elam has had a pretty strong start to camp for what it's worth, multiple days in a row with picks. The Bills are counting on him to fill that Dane Jackson role, that first boundary corner off the bench. They do have other options there. Cam Lewis can play outside if needed. But it would be huge for the Bills' first round draft pick from 2 seasons ago to emerge into that Dane Jackson role, because you start projecting ahead to next year. Rasul Douglas could be out the door, and you really might need Kyer Elam to be a starter on this team. So year 3, not time to give up on him yet. We'll see where that goes. But I think once the games start and then the referees start calling defensive holding, that's when we'll get a better idea of where Kyer Elam is at. Let's talk offense, because I think the story of camp has been the offensive side of the football. And for those that have been out there, and particularly our friends at Cover One, who do a good job of describing the things that the beat reporters just unfortunately are not allowed to, based on team agreements, NFL agreements, Cover One sitting in the bleachers. They do not have set agreements. They're paying to be there, so they can say whatever they want, and they're doing so. The Bills are using a lot of pre-snap motion, which is something you and I have been screaming for the last couple of years. It's like, why did you draft James Cook and Dalton Kincaid if you're just going to stand them still pre-snap and let the defense know exactly where they're going to line up? And there's even been rumors of using the cheetah motion that Tyreek Hill uses to get a head start on things. And the way that you can manipulate coverages and really get the answers to the test before the ball is snapped with certain motions. And then you look at some of the gadget players the Bills have, and I use that as a compliment, players that are flexible enough to play multiple positions: Curtis Samuel, Dalton Kincaid, James Cook, in particular. I think this opens up a world of possibilities for the Bills. It always sounds good in July. We'll see what it equates to in September, but there was, save for one 10-minute period, Luca, on Friday, where Josh Allen threw 3 interceptions in that one span. The offense has been cooking the defense. And there was one huge Curtis Samuel day. Keon Coleman, I think, has 4 touchdowns now, and he's been making plays all over the field. Dalton Kincaid looks like he is ready to just absolutely set the league on fire. And Khalil Shakir, multiple years in a row, we'd hear about like one big play and then drops. You're not hearing that this year, just steady Eddie. And then your guy, Mac Hollins, has been fitting in where he fits in. Those appear to be the big 4. But Joe Brady even said as such, Luca, that this is not an offense that's going to have like one primary go-to guy where we know it's going to funnel through him. It really is whoever's open is going to eat. And then it was your guy, Mac Hollins, that had the quote. It's like, why is it? The reporter asked, how are receivers feeling about an offense where anybody can eat? And he's like, as long as we all have a plate, we're good. And it was just a fantastic quote. But it's going to be a new look Bills offense. It's going to be make it very tricky to project from a fantasy perspective, but it's going to be interesting to see the growth of Josh Allen in this new era of, I don't have that 1A alpha, but now I have a bunch of guys on any given day. It can be their day.
It's going to be tough in fantasy, except for one thing and one thing only. Josh Allen's still going to be Josh Allen.
He'll be just fine.
He'll be just fine because he is number 17 on the Bills doing his thing. Mac Hollins is just my absolute home run. It feels like I come out of preseason, and normally it's rookies, and I still have the guys rookie-wise that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to watch this guy. There was the Christian Benford situation, and so, there's plenty of examples, but Mac Hollins has won me over with how cerebral he is. And I mean that not necessarily like, oh, his football IQ is through the roof. It's like, no, just as a human being, like listening to Mac Hollins is so fascinating to me. I can't, I wish we could spend the next half hour to hit that hour point in this episode just to talk about Mac Hollins, because I think we could, or at least I could. But I mentioned the feet conversation. That sounded weird just saying feet, but the barefoot situation of him just being barefoot regularly, I will say I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit on that. It makes a lot of sense. It's pretty logical. You do have to clean your feet a little bit more often to do something like that. But overall, I can fully understand it based on what he's saying. I loved his comment when someone had asked about the cut up shirt, essentially asking him, why he does that as a fashion statement. And he actually had a rational explanation for that. And I off air, I told you, like, his response to that was, in Miami, the shirt would get wet and stuff. So it dries quicker if you cut the strands so you can wipe your hands off quicker, because you just have drier shirt to do so. Like, makes sense. It's a practical reason that then just has developed into a tendency. And he then made a joke about how it's a little hacked up because he had to use scissors. If anyone wants to provide him a proper, linen cutter, feel free to do so. If it's like the toilet paper situation we saw with Von Miller, he's about to receive 50 linen roll cutters.
He probably will
soon enough. So overall, though, going back just to the offense and going back to football, Josh, it's been fun. It's been fun to see these reports come out and things like that. It's been fun to hear about that eye candy. Yes, as you mentioned, as soon as I see that kind of stuff, Josh, I just go, all right, let me see what happens week 1. Because what
Yeah.
we're seeing in training camp could be them just testing stuff around, labbing things, seeing what works. We're seeing a lot of pre-snap motion here. Where is it come game day? It's like, it's probably because you saw a lot of it in training camp. Yes, it's being successful there, but they're also recognizing that maybe timing's not working to game day level speed, or, maybe people are just, you might not see it because one route was run correctly and Josh Allen found them, but also these 2 routes were just run like garbage and these guys are just not getting it, or they're just not doing the motion right, or this. Like, there's so many variables that go into this. Just because you're seeing it now doesn't necessarily mean, hey, that's all they're going to be doing 24/7 every game. This is just all they'll do now. It's a promising thing to hear, but let's see what happens as it develops into. You're not going to see it in preseason. I can guarantee you that. It's going to be stagnant, 12 personnel or whatever else you want to call it, and just don't put anything on tape. Maybe they'll test one in there, just be like, oh, let's see how this one works. But overall, you're not going to see it. So come week 1 of the regular season, that's when we'll really see if that's what they're going with. But the receiving options, as you have noted here, as you mentioned, Shakir, Samuel, Keon Coleman, Mac Hollins, they're really starting to separate themselves. I'm not concerned with MVS not really getting a lot of time with the ones. I think it just, you hear Josh Allen name drop him when someone asks him about the receiving change question. MVS got brought up in one interview. Obviously, Josh Allen gets interviewed by a lot of people. One of the interviews, MVS got brought up before Shakir, before Kincaid, before I think it was Mac Hollins even. Like, he was one of the first few names he brought up as, these are the weapons I have now kind of situation. So if he's at that forefront of his mind, I would find it hard to believe that they're just going to magically let him go, even if you haven't seen him with the ones a lot this time. And then realistically, we'll see how the depth pans out from there. It's promising, though, that we are hearing that they're being successful, especially early on in camp. Yes, it's camp and camp speed, and just you're testing certain things. There's a red zone day, there's this and that, and you're really just testing scenarios. But overall, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, you generally hear about it being rough around the edges, or it's not clicking on all cylinders, or it's stalling out at times. That's not the case here. It's been a back and forth. Like, the defense has gotten the better of Josh. You mentioned the 10-minute period where it's 3 straight interceptions, or this and that. It's not going to be all perfect, but that's just because the defense is making proper adjustments. And let's be honest here, those 2 coordinators are probably very competitive in these situations, and they're trying to get the upper hand on the other. That's how it works. Now, the offensive coordinator is more trying to test and instill things in the offense. He's not entirely focused on that. But you bet you sweet ass, Josh, that Babich is looking at stuff and going, no, I want this to fail. I'm going to force you to fail this. Like, that is his job. He wants his defense to go out there and kick your butt. That's what he wants. That's what he wants to see out of the people. That's what he wants to see for his own pride. So you have to take your lumps, both sides, and both sides are going to find success, and that's okay.
Josh Allen said in one of his press conferences that there's a lot of open communication between he and Bobby Babich, and it's a lot of iron sharpens iron thing where they'll kind of bounce off of each other. Hey, what did you see on this play? Is there something I could have done better? Is there any tendencies I'm giving away, or anything that we're doing that it makes it easier for you all? And you love to see that. Obviously, they're all pulling, in the same direction. But sometimes it can get lost when these guys are battling for jobs, not Allen and Babich specifically, but these are the Buffalo Bills, and come September, they're going to be all pulling in the same direction. But right now, there are legitimately guys who have dreamed of playing in the NFL all their life, desperately trying to make a team. And so it's nice to see that knowledge share going on. You mentioned the big 4, and I do think a big 4 has been established. And I am also with you. I would still say it's a big 5, but Shakir, Samuel, and Keon Coleman, top 3, whatever order you want to give it. Neither here nor there. The Bills run a lot of 11. Those will be the 3 on the field. Mac Hollins and Mac Hollins will be the 4th as far as who I think is the safest right now. MVS, when you look at his contract, and I put this out on Twitter, and some folks very astutely said OJ Howard's contract was fully guaranteed, but his 2.5 is fully guaranteed. There's a void year on the back end of that, so the Bills can kind of, stomach some of it. But when you start comparing his contract to, say, Chase Claypool's contract, the Bills will lose essentially nothing if they cut Chase Claypool. Just some food for thought. But I'm not overly worried. about MVS being invisible. The Josh Allen piece is the biggest piece of that to me, because you hear that Josh Allen targeted him as somebody he really wanted. Josh Allen has mentioned that. And I also put this out on Twitter that MVS really is the only true deep threat, take the top off the defense, wide receiver on this team. And some folks took exception to that, thinking, no, wait a minute. Curtis Samuel's got 4.3 speed, and I've seen Khalil Shakir get deep, and, yada, yada, yada. And I respect all of that. But when you look at the metrics, the true deep metrics for these wide receivers that go beyond just who was the quarterback throwing them the ball, MVS ranks up with the elite deep ball receivers in this league. I know he's a meme because he dropped big passes on national TV for the Chiefs, but his ability to stretch the field and get on the other side of the defense is as good as it gets, outside of like the tippy top Justin Jeffersons in this league, who are just aliens. Like, MVS has a very elite skill. It is one skill. And to be a great receiver in this league, you need multiple skills. Curtis Samuel is a better receiver than MVS. I fully believe that. But as far as just a true deep threat, MVS is a guy that the Bills will want to hit, because I think they are going to miss that skill set if he's not there. And I expect him to be there. Say what you want. He's a guy that's won back-to-back Super Bowls. He's played in big games in Green Bay, in Kansas City. The moment's not going to be too big for him. Does he drop the ball occasionally? Sure. But I think his skill set is one that the Bills are certainly going to want to take advantage of. Let's talk about Keon Coleman real quick, Luca. Nothing major to talk about, highlight catches. I just think the way I would describe Keon Coleman so far through training camp is as good as advertised and as good as you could have hoped for pre-pads coming on.
Yeah, everything we're seeing should not be a surprise to anyone that has any inkling of who Keon Coleman was before getting drafted. It's exactly what you should expect. I don't know, it was one of the first days. I mean, we're only 1 weekend, but I think it was either day 1 or 2. Keon Coleman had a catch in the end zone that then, of course, the social media team put out, and everyone was just talking about how he looked like he was floating. And it was funny. 1, I think it was camera angle, of course, just the perfect angle for it. But 2, he does a little bit, but it's not a surprise. That's who he is. He's an athletic guy. He can get up there and get that ball high pointed in a very smooth like manner. It's not like, oh wow, maybe we really found a superstar here. It's like Keon Coleman was projected potentially as a first round receiver for a reason. And the only reason he isn't a first round receiver is because the Bills traded back a couple times to take him at 33 instead of 32, or where they were lying in the first place. So that was a guy they had eyed at the time. They were comfortable enough knowing that they would get him at 33, a little bit of a gamble, but still it worked out in the end. And he is just, it's not overly impressive, but he's impressive regardless. He looks as advertised, as you said, and we'll just have to see what happens. I think it was Mac Hollins, Curtis Samuel. I don't think I'm missing any other receivers that talk to media. Keon Coleman has, of course, come up. Just questions on how's he handling things so far, stuff like that. And I love media. It's a very softball question. It's self-explanatory, writes itself, but I appreciate that they at least ask it to vets in the receiver room just to gauge. Like, you're going to get a certain answer out of the player themselves, but getting it out of vets and stuff like that, what I've found interesting out of both of them is they've given a little bit of a different answer, but they all come to the same point where it's, he's getting it. It's not this isn't too much for him. It's not, we're working on getting him up to speed. It's none of that BS. He gets it. And they're just excited to see how he handles the next step is basically what they're getting at. And I love hearing that out of a rookie. It's not, hey, the first week's been a little tough. Keon clearly has done his homework. He studied the playbook, as he likes to say in his very funny way, I guess, with the media. It's not like he's trying to make a joke. Just everyone laughs at how he presents himself, which there's nothing to laugh at. It's laugh with, because he's hilarious. But
very funny.
He is studying the playbook. He understands what's going on. He is collaborating with the rest of the receiver room, with Allen, and it's clearly clicking in some fashion right now. As you mentioned, multiple touchdowns in their, scenario practices and everything of such. So he's as advertised. It's working out, and just hopefully it keeps trending in that positive direction as we approach the season.
You mentioned how good of an athlete he is. Think about the fact that he was drafted 33rd overall in the NFL draft. He could have gone in the first round. And oh, by the way, he played Division I college basketball at Michigan State. like freakish athletic skills. And I thought Dan Fates and Jenna Cottrell on Buffalo Plus had a really interesting take on Keon Coleman, because they said the same thing that you said, is he has a fun personality. You think about what his first day there, and he was like eating the cookie and talking about like how delicious it was, and just it was like having a conversation with the nicest guy in the room and not the first draft pick of the Buffalo Bills. And it just was so casual. But they said that it's not like he showed up and he was cranky, but you could just tell, like, when training camp started, it was business time. And it wasn't like cracking jokes, and it was much more serious. And I think when you read up on Keon Coleman, that's not overly surprising. He is a super competitive person, maybe in a lot of ways, like a Tre'Davious White, like a Josh Allen. They have that goofy side, but when it's game time, like, those guys are dogs. And there's a reason why Josh Allen and Tre'Davious White are two of the best players at their respective position in the last generation. And, Keon Coleman has a long way to go to enter that conversation, but at least from a mentality standpoint, I can see a little bit of that, and that's encouraging. Ray Davis has been impressing. We do have a question from one of our followers on him, so we'll get to him and that piece of it, but he's getting rave reviews for his ability to catch passes out of the backfield. And, I do want to mention before I forget, Kim Pagula was out at practice on Friday, and great to see her. First public appearance in my memory. I know she went to camp last year, Luca, but she was in the Pagula's van and didn't make like any public appearance. I know there was some scumbag for the Buffalo News who like tried to get up really close and get a picture of her, which is just completely disrespectful. But like, she was actually out and walked over and broke down the team, and that was pretty cool to see. Just as an aside, I try not to lecture people, but like, if you're making fun of this and you have a joke about what's going on with Kim Pagula, you are just like the worst form of a human being there is. And if you take pleasure in somebody else's pain, I don't understand that mentality. But really cool sight to see. And, I think back to Kim Pagula from a couple years ago when she was doing the podcast with Maddie Glab. And, you saw things from like inside the draft room where she was just kind of like life of the party. And, you really, like, it was like that classic husband wife relationship. And I'm saying this a little bit tongue in cheek, where it's kind of like, she's like the brains of the operation, and she kind of makes sure he stays on the rails. And, it's sad what they've gone through. It's sad what she's going through. You wish her the best, but man, it was good to see her out there.
Yeah, it's always positive with all the health concerns, all the things that have been going on. It's good to see someone just getting back in the rhythm of things. I think no matter where you are in your stature of life, like
Yeah.
that's always what you want someone to achieve. You never want to see it just continually progress in the negative direction where eventually you meet your mortal end. Like
Right.
that is the eventual end for every person in this world. However it comes, it will come. But it's nice to see things like that. This one being that they're more in the public eye, they've been around both the Bills, Sabres, things like that. And it's then all of a sudden, unfortunately, something came up that left them, have to take care of something for a long period of time, put Terry in a little bit of a situation of his own personal dilemma with that. And it takes away from what he can do and achieve as an owner of these teams and whatnot. So it's just a positive human thing to see. And overall, yeah, there's nothing wrong
Absolutely.
with that whatsoever.
It was good to see her out there. One last thought here before we get to our comments from our followers on Twitter. Your guy, Cedric Van Pran Granger, getting exclusively reps with the third team. And I saw some concern on Twitter. Is he behind in this race? Is he a risk to being cut? Because consistently, Alec Anderson and Will Clapp have been on the second team, rotating between center and guard. I will tell you my read on this. My read on this is one, no, I don't think Cedric Van Pran Granger is any risk of being cut. I mean, unless something unforeseen happens. I think what's happening here between Will Clapp and Alec Anderson is the Bills are trying to find their Ryan Bates replacement, as in the veteran, the first guy off the bench for the interior who can play center and guard. That's why they're rotating them with the second unit, and they want to see them at center, at guard, flip-flop back and forth. How can your technique do today at center when you were guard yesterday? What's your line checks? And then we want to see you going against the best players possible. That's my read on it. I honestly think, Luca, there's probably only one spot for those two guys, Alec Anderson and Will Clapp. Will Clapp's injury is probably going to complicate things. I would have given Alec Anderson the nod above him anyway, just because of experience with Aaron Kromer's system. But I think it's It's a different conversation than Cedric Van Pran Granger, who's a rookie you have under control for 4 years. You took in the 5th round, and by all accounts, was a steal at that spot. Look, he could hit the ground running, be your next Osiris Torrance, and be ready to start from day one. Fantastic. I think the Bills right now are looking at him as this player they're trying to mold. Ideally, by next year, he's ready to be that Ryan Bates guy, first guy off the bench, or maybe even challenge for a starting job. You just never know. But right now, the smart thing to do is to make sure you have a veteran in place. And that's what I read going on with Anderson and Clapp. I'd be pretty surprised if Anderson and Clapp both made this roster.
I'll even expand on kind of where your thoughts are. I think what they're doing with, I'm just going to do the abbreviation because I'm just too lazy to say his full name, SVPG. What they're trying to do with SVPG is, I think they're just trying to gauge what kind of lineman he truly is. Is he just a pure center? Is he going to be something that where you could potentially have him play that inside trio? You know, what do you have in him? And while you're trying to get up to speed and gauge him, why would you then throw him into the fire on top of that when you do actually need to figure that out for the here and now? Just have him be in a comfort zone of where you are with him. Let him focus on that. Is he a true center? Do you just need to develop him that way? Is he someone that could kind of move around that top 3 or inside 3? I think that's realistically what you have to do with any modern day lineman. You have to almost ease them in a little bit. I compare it a little bit to cross sports. To it's not polar the same, but I think how you need to treat them in development is similar. It's to like a goaltender in hockey, where you can't just expect them to come in at the top level and perform at a high level considering what they did previously. You really need to let them kind of grow and figure themselves out at a lower standard to then ultimately understand what you have. And throwing someone that's younger directly in the fire, or as much of a fire as you can as possible, can truly stunt or just delay what understanding what you have, letting them just understand what they are at the pro level. And you really just need to let them kind of marinate and grow at their own pace at a lower standard, where it can kind of, the game will come to them while you also try to figure out what they truly are. And that's where the comparison ends, of course, because we're talking offensive line to goalie. It's totally different otherwise. But I think that's what they're doing with him. They're just letting him grow at his own pace, figuring out what it is, and just understanding, like you kind of said, is he going to be someone competing just for the center job come next year? Is he going to be someone competing for that swing interior offensive line spot come next year? What is he? We have a year, as he's controlled right now, a day 3 pick salary, to just figure that out. And that's absolutely okay. If you get to the point where you're getting to him in the starting lineup, you probably ran into some serious issues otherwise. And that's also okay in his regard. It's not okay for the Bills, but it's okay for him. Like, you shouldn't have expected this 5th round rookie to come in and be your starting center. Or you should, in that same light, you shouldn't be sitting here being disappointed in a 5th round center, being like, why isn't he threatening the second team? Why isn't he threatening that kind of interior offensive line swing spot that he can really be a game day active guy that can fill that Bates role? It's like, no, he doesn't need to be that guy. Let's figure out what we have in him, and then he'll figure out what he is as a pro. And maybe come next year, that's when you could see him competing for that game day roster spot, if not something more, as he develops this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. A different trajectory, and I think there's a really good chance that Aaron Kromer is breaking him down a little bit to rebuild him up, with some whatever techniques he wants to see him use to fit Buffalo Bills football and really ramp him up for next year. All right, Luca, let's get to the question we posed on Twitter, which was, what's the number one thing on your mind regarding the 2024 Buffalo Bills? Is it a question? Is it a concern? Do you have a hot take? Hit us with whatever you're thinking, and we will discuss it on the podcast. We can't get to everybody. We appreciate everybody that let us know what they were thinking. The first two here are kind of similar. We'll start with Q, and it's Q Bugavelli. He says, hot take, the Bills will be just as good as they were last year from a rankings and win perspective. And along those lines, Disney Wife, who is one of our most interactive Twitter followers, we really enjoy talking with her. My not so hot take is I think this offense is going to be better this year than it was last year. So hers more offensive specific, Q's more about the team overall. Luca, when you see that, what are your thoughts when you see that?
I think that's the promise of hope and it's the hope that can kill you, but it's also the hope that can make you stronger or make you at least believe in something better is out there. I I think this kind of goes into what I almost opened up this pod with a little bit, not the one where I'm talking about NCAA football here, Josh. I'm fast forward a little bit past that,
Mhm.
where I was talking about just the freshness and the vibe change that's there, and you can sense it, you can feel it. It's palpable, like it is out there, and with that, I think brings optimism among the fans, probably inside the dressing room as well. There's just a change of flow. There's the vibes are just different in a positive manner that it's not surprising to me that I think these are one of many people out there that believe that they are actually better than the media is projecting them and are even better than potentially what we saw out of them last year. And I'll be honest. I'm not saying I don't agree with these people. I this is a true I need to see it to believe it. So this is where, not to spoil it a little bit, weeks 1 through 4 for me are going to be massive. That's when I'll eventually come up with an opinion of how I think this team is. I think it's, in my own mind, in my own opinion, irresponsible to think otherwise because you have no idea what to expect. So why would I just manufacture an opinion right now? Um, but I will say that that thought creeps into my head where I go, I actually can see a world where this offense runs a lot better, a lot smoother than what we experienced last year. And if you really look under the hood, to steal your phrase, of last year and remember what week by week was, it was not a smooth experience whatsoever. The early part, weeks 1 through 4, were realistically, take out one, weeks 2 through 4 were the only smooth part of the season. That was the only time that you're like, okay, we're running on all cylinders. Things are going. We're blowing teams out. We're dominating. The questions in the national media were, are the Bills a juggernaut once again? Things like that. Perennial Super Bowl contender, so on and so forth. And then week 5 in London happens. A couple massive injuries, and the wheels started coming off. And it just, even as we were winning games down the stretch, we won 6 or 7 straight going into that divisional game. It wasn't like it was a smooth experience.
Right.
So it's not hard to believe that with a fresh vibe, with a fresh look, with fresh personnel, everything like that, and the vibes are good and they're loose, as you even said, it could be better. It could run smoother. And if it runs smoother than last year, it's not outlandish to say that they're not going to be just as good, if not maybe even a little better. And somehow that team last year still won as many games as it did with it not being a smooth experience. So I can understand where they're coming from. I like where they're coming from. I hope to be with them very shortly as the season progresses early on.
So as far as defense goes, I think the path is pretty clear. It's health, because
Yeah.
the Bills after London played the rest of their season without Matt Milano, the rest of their season without Daquan Jones, save for the last couple games in the playoffs. He was not himself. Greg Rousseau midseason definitely suffered an injury and was not himself the rest of the way. And you could really argue, not even trying to be cute, the Bills played the entire season without Von Miller. All 4 of those guys are projected to be back on this team and should have big roles on this team. Now, you can't minimize the losses of Hyde and Poyer, but when you look at the fact that the Bills went into a playoff game last year with an injured Tyrell Dodson and AJ Klein starting at linebacker, good health could go a long way in cementing this defense. Let's flip it around on the offensive side of the ball, Luca. I know it's jarring when you lose a Stephon Diggs. I'm not trying to minimize that. And Mitch Morris and Gabe Davis will certainly have impact. But the path to me is pretty clear. You have young players like Dalton Kincaid, James Cook. I'm still going to count Josh Allen as a young player, and Khalil Shakir, and then Osiris Torrance getting better, like progression. Are they better versions of themselves than last year? It's the second year with Joe Brady with full install. You're not going to have a midseason coordinator change, you hope, because my God, what would have to happen for that to happen? And now you also talk about the fact that, the offensive line probably going to have some struggles, but you're talking about Aaron Cromer. You just want to trust his judgment. And, it is an influx of talent in wide receiver. But I also think it's easy to look back at this Bills team and think, oh, they're the Bills. It's Josh Allen and Diggs. This offense was elite, but they were barely top 10 in passing last year and barely top 10 in rushing. I think they were 10th in passing and 8th in rushing. So being as good or better than last year. They don't even have to be great. They just be very good and they can get it done. So I can see the paths on both sides. I love the optimism, and thank you both for your contribution. Speaking of optimism, our guy Connor, the Florida man from the Undercovers podcast, doing a great job covering training camp for the Bills. We are winning the Super Bowl. All right, Connor. Well, no argument from me. That would be great to see. And we have a few months to figure that one out. But we appreciate you as always. What's the next one I want to get into here? We are going to do Holy Shrimp. All right. He has 3 different hot takes. We'll kind of look at them and see which one stands out to us. How will the D look with unfamiliar faces at safety? We talked about that a little bit earlier in the episode. You really don't know, but I would anticipate that at least early on, it's going to be Edwards and Rapp because of the way the season starts tricky. But Bishop has been flashing. Well, pads come on. We'll learn a lot sooner. Did we upgrade the D line to create enough pressure come postseason? Oh, he has 2 good ones here. And Ray Davis will be our feature back by the season. Let's start with the Ray Davis one, and let's dive into this D-line thing. I don't think it's Looney Tunes to say that Ray Davis will be the feature back by the end of the regular season. I do think there is a world where that happens. One, running backs get injured all the time, like all the time. And James Cook is not a big guy. So you could easily see a situation where he's like Nick Chubb, gets hurt. Ray Davis is Jerome Ford, comes in, feature back. But I don't think that's what he's saying. He's not predicting injury. I think he's saying that Ray Davis will just outperform James Cook. What would that look like? I think the best way to unseat James Cook, Luca, as a feature back would be to completely outshine him in pass protection. And you have pointed out that that is not a strength of Ray Davis's in college. James Cook did get better as the season went on. I think Ray Davis is going to be a very important part of this offense. I do expect him to be the second running back, off the bench after James Cook when he needs a blow. But no, I think with what James Cook can provide them in the passing game, the way they like to move him around. Now, look, if James Cook keeps dropping the ball, it doesn't matter how open he gets. He's got to fix that and fix it now. But I think it would be a pretty big surprise if Ray Davis is just chosen over James Cook at any point this year.
That's polite. I think you did that. You did that spin zone very politely. Let me just do this bluntly. I think the hot take spin of this would be, and I guess, I'm not saying that I'm speaking for Holy Shrimp, which, by the way, his picture is literally a shrimp with a halo over it. So shout out.
It's pretty fishy.
It's pretty. Oh my God. Boy, he's back.
Mid-season form.
The hot take I would have with Ray Davis' contribution to this offense was Ray Davis will establish himself as a 1B option. And I mean that in the same of he will truly be that bang to what, the dash is of Cook, right? So you have your dash and your bang, right? You got that nice complement there that will be your 1B to your 1A as Cook. Cook is your 1A, barring injury, barring anything crazy. Cook is your 1A. That is always what it will be. He's your 1A and C right now. Yes, Ray Davis could absolutely step up. To even add to it, what would it take for Ray Davis to be the feature back? One, the NFL needs to change. Feature backs don't really exist anymore unless you're Christian McCaffrey. So that's already against him. Two, not only does he have to get better in pass protection, but he would still have to outshine James Cook in all the other facets as well. And I think James Cook's a pretty good athlete. It's going to take a lot for Ray Davis to do that. So I look, it's a take of takes. And I love people that swing for the fences. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to hate on it whatsoever. What I am going to kind of go with is if that happens, Holy Shrimp can see into the future. That's what I'll go with that one. That is hitting an Aaron Judge 475-footer over left center. That's a bomb of bombs called out. So that would be something. If we get a 1B in Ray Davis, I will be so thrilled. I will be so over the moon excited because we've been calling for that, right? We've been calling for a nice weapon in the backfield ever since Shady left. Now that we have one, it's like in modern NFL talk, you need that complement with it. And we've never had that. The problem even before Cook was you had Motor, which I'm just learning that people outside of Buffalo didn't know that Singletary's nickname was Motor because dude, I can't believe this came up organically on this show, but watching Rich Eisen they were talking about the Giants offseason hard knocks, and they were all fascinated by Singletary's nickname being Motor, and they'd never heard that before. I was like, wow, that really never made it to the national circuit. Now, did it? Even though he was kind of the starting halfback for a Josh Allen-led Bills offense for a few years with Dable. That was an interesting little tidbit. So, fun fact: we apparently knew his nickname before the rest of the world.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah, the compliment is even when you had Singletary, you didn't have that. Zach Moss never turned into that, so on and so forth. Although he's figuring it out now with other teams, so good
Holy
for him.
cow. Yeah.
But if Ray Davis can be that, I will be over the moon with that for
I
sure.
think it's important to note too, like Ray Davis is catching the ball well out of the backfield, which is great to see. James Cook is a unicorn when it comes to pass catching running backs. He is on, uh, not on the McCaffrey level, but he is McCaffrey-like in the fact that he could run routes at a wide receiver level. He is a mismatch waiting to happen. He has to catch the ball way more consistently than he does, but his ability to get open and create separation is very unique. It's top of the league. And we need him to figure it out because he is a weapon. To point number 2, did we upgrade the D-line enough to create pressure come postseason? My answer to that would be no. But I would leave it open to interpretation for how much better you think Von Miller will be. I don't think this is a Bills defensive line as currently constructed that has a Batman, that has a guy like a Chris Jones that you can rely on in those clutch situations to create pressure. And, I think for the most part, that's probably fine because once you get to a certain depth of the playoffs anyway, you're going to run into those quarterbacks where it's not going to be about sacks and pressure. It's really going to be about tackling and scheme and can you outscore them? And every once in a while you get a scheme where Cincinnati goes into Arrowhead and just shuts down Mahomes, and that's fantastic. And maybe the Bills defensive line is capable of doing that. But I don't think that this defensive line, as currently constructed, even with a little bit better improved Von Miller, maybe a healthier Rousseau, unless they find a lottery ticket in Solomon, or Ed Oliver builds on what he did last year and becomes like a top 5 defensive tackle in the sport. As it is right now, I think they're probably going to be pretty close to what they've been, which is a good regular season defensive line. And come playoffs, don't expect them to dominate the game. Just hope they don't lose you the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's too much more to add to it. No, they didn't do enough to upgrade it significantly, but you're just kind of hoping for internal upgrades. That's really what you're doing. There's no one on the D. This is how I look at it, Josh. You mentioned Chris Jones. You're watching a Chiefs game on Sunday Night Football, and the game gets closed out, and one of those slow-mo clips as NBC's fading out will be Chris Jones celebrating something of a significance. No one exists on the Bills D line that would be of that closing out a Sunday Night Football game. No. So no, they did not. They did not add that kind of guy. But as you had pointed out, you're relying on the hope that Von Miller does come back a little bit more to himself. He's not going to be 100% back to pre-injury form, but you hope he's back to himself, not the 2 tackle. I loved Von Miller in the media. He called out like it was ingrained in his brain that he had 2 total tackles last year.
It was a good interview.
Yeah, it was a good interview, and he's been thinking about it all off season, how disappointing he was last year. So that's good. For someone of his caliber, that's good. But overall, yeah, it's just not there.
All right, Maddie at Bills Gal 419. By the way, thank you, Holy Shrimp, for the questions. We appreciate it. Maddie at Bills Gal 419. Number 1, receiver situation. Seems like MVS had a quiet camp and 6 receivers up in the air. We very much agree with that, Maddie. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. Don't want to necessarily rehash it, but we see it the same exact way as you do. Although Luca and I do firmly believe that MVS still is really going to have to go way downhill, even from where he's at, to lose his spot on the team. There's been some momentum for Tyrell Shavers. He had a really strong offseason, really strong spring. I know they like him in the building. But even Chase Claypool is a guy that we thought had some momentum coming out of the spring, but now he's been banged up a little bit here and there in camp. Maybe he's a guy you thought could challenge. And then Justin Shorter, I think he's going to have to end up being like the best special teamer on this team to really sniff a roster spot, because it just doesn't seem like from a receiver standpoint, he's going to have an opportunity there. But let's go to your second question. Concern defense. Is the offense that good, or is the defense in trouble? Now, her question is valid because we keep hearing about how awesome the defense, or how awesome the offense is, save from that 1 10-minute span on Friday where Josh Allen threw 3 interceptions in a row. At what point, Luca, it's the battle we always have in training camp. Every time there's a big play, you got to understand it came against my other side of the ball. Are you concerned about this defense? They've lost some big names. They have some turnover, or is this defense not really something that concerns you right now?
No, it's the one world where all the talk out there is the Bills needed to do something at head coach finally to change from McDermott. They needed to go in a more progressive manner, get an offensive coach. We are still guilty of it at times. You know, it's something that we crave to get to that next level. You see all the success elsewhere doing that model. But if there's one glass half full about having McDermott and a defensive minded coach there is, tell me, in the McDermott era, regardless of personnel, when have they had a bad defense? Because the answer is quite literally never. And it's been a revolving door in some sense, with different pieces on the D line being there, with different linebackers being there, even in his era. You know, of course, they solidified it for a good chunk when it comes to the secondary and linebackers. But overall, even when injuries are coming, you're getting productive games out of AJ Klein, the joke himself. Actually, no disrespect to AJ Klein. He still played in the NFL for a long period of time. You have a pension that's coming your way due to it. Like, we are not NFL caliber athletes over here. So I'm not shit talking you as a person. It's just at the NFL standard of when you were playing for the Bills, you were pretty low. And yet we were still getting productive games out of you where you were like, things are actually okay-ish, even as AJ Klein is playing meaningful minutes. That is, I believe, due to the nature of having McDermott as your coach and having the defensive staff that you do. So no, it's training camp. Coming out of camp, I have mentioned more stuff happens on the offensive side. You're instilling things. Well, yeah, you also have turnover on the defensive side, and you're trying to instill different things. Babich is trying to do his own thing over there as well. Things are not always going to work out. It's training camp. But at the end of the day, you have McDermott, you have Babich. These are proven successful people in that world. They will be able to at least give you a above average defense, regardless of the personnel in my eyes, because they have a proven track record of it. And then it will go up from there as people figure things out. So I am not at all concerned about it.
And Maddie, I would say that I think that the Bills defense is going to be a sum of the parts is greater, or wait, the whole, what's the saying? Like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But
Yeah.
You look at this defense, like, is there a surefire stud? I mean, Taron Johnson's pretty good. Matt Milano at his best is pretty good. Ed Oliver had a good year last year. Rasul Douglas made some plays last year, but I get the argument, like, you know, where's the Nick Bosa and the Fred Warners on this defense? But the one thing about the McDermott defense is they are a simple defense. They want you to play fast, and they don't try to overload you with Rex Ryan style, where every play you have 5 different things to consider as soon as the ball is snapped. So they will play fast. I'm not worried about them being confused. And to Luca's point, they've never had a bad defense under McDermott. Even in 2017, when they gave up like 49 points at home to the Saints and then went to the Chargers the next week and gave up like 50 points in the Peterman game, they still finished as a top 20 defense, which is, you know, mediocre, not bad. And, you know, McDermott has made chicken salad out of chicken, you know what, a lot of times. And I don't think this is chicken, you know what. I think this is a respectable group of defenders that has the support of what should be a very excellent offense. So I totally hear your concern. I would not expect them to go out there and shut down the elite offenses. The elite defenses don't do that. But I think the goal is get enough stops that your offense can win games for you. Maddie had one more question or one more take. Kyer Elam takes over the starting job for either Benford or Douglas. I don't see that. I think it would take an injury to Christian Benford, which we have seen each of the first 2 years. To me, Kyer Elam has to walk before he can run. I love the optimism. I love the fact that he's making plays in camp, but man, Luke, Benford and Douglas are 2 pretty damn good football players.
That's a nightmare scenario for me, John. John.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
It's a late night, people. No, that's a nightmare scenario for me. That, please don't deprive me of Benford and Douglas. Just let me be happy.
If Kyer Elam comes in and he's just a lockdown cornerback, who's not signing up for that?
But, agreed. But yeah. I just love those two too much. Personally, that boy, I would be very upset to see that world end. I mean, look, if Elam deserves it, I'm not going to complain. Like, if Elam as we talked about in previous episodes, if the light switch flipped and all of a sudden he figured it out, fantastic. But he better earn it. It better not be just because of default due to injury or anything else that then it's like, okay, now he's figured it out to be substantial enough where we're like, now we need to justify the first round pick. Unfortunately, Benford, you're going to take a back seat because at least Elam's being adequate. It's like, no. Elam better be outstanding and
Yeah.
win that position.
And at his best, like if he hits his ceiling, he's going to be a turnover machine. He has a nose
Yeah.
for taking the ball away, and Rasul Douglas has the same exact thing. So you think about those guys who are big in stature, take the ball away. If they're on the field at the same time, Elam at his ceiling, it's fun to think about. I'm not predicting it, but hey, we asked for bold predictions. We appreciate you,
Yeah.
Maddie. Thanks for listening. Thanks for contributing. Um, EDC guarantee 15. Eric, the safeties, one, already touched on that. O-line, they shouldn't have cut Morse. We'll talk about that. Wide receivers, they definitely need someone to step up and show they can get open in critical situations besides Samuel. Quickly on the wide receivers, I do agree with that. I would say that I think they're more confident in Khalil Shakir than the outside world is. I think they think that Dalton Kincaid is going to be an absolute tippy top of the league tight end in this league. And they obviously love Keon Coleman. So that they have some doors to open. It's not like this is an empty cupboard like 2018 where you needed an undrafted free agent and Robert Foster to come in and be your number one wide receiver because Kelvin Benjamin could no longer cut the mustard unless he was making himself a sandwich because he was like 20 pounds overweight. Why would you cut mustard anyway?
I don't know.
O-line, they shouldn't have cut Morse. We talked about that a little bit this offseason. I didn't need them to cut Mitch Morse. They did it. It was a move they could do to get under the salary cap. Unfortunately, Luca, right now we don't really know much more than what we knew 3 months ago. The pads haven't come on yet. You haven't heard any horror stories about Connor McGovern flipping snaps over Josh Allen's head. As far as center goes, no news is good news. So as long as we don't hear McGovern's name mentioned, it's probably fine. But the proof will be in the pudding on this one. If you get into a game and I'm thinking like week 2 in Miami and it's hot and it's the ball's sweaty and you almost just never saw Mitch Morse with a bad snap. And if a bad snap could cost the Bills a game, we'll all be thinking about that. But for now, I don't have a whole lot to add to it other than my eyes on it. We'll see what they do. And I hope they're right.
Yeah, my only take on it is during one of those interviews that Allen was a part of, he quite literally said, I got to go take more practice snaps.
Yeah.
Like he acknowledged it's a new center, got to figure this one out and stuff like that. So at least they're being conscientious of it. Like they understand, everyone in the room understands what the heck is going on with that center quarterback exchange. So that's good. At least they don't go, we're just going to slide him in and it's just going to work. Like we don't have to put any extra effort in. It's like, no, that's a pretty vital piece of the good old game of football. So you better figure that one out and be very comfortable with it. So they made that change. They did that. And they even in day 3 took a center that they may try to see what he's got in years to come. Like there is a focus on it and they're going to see what happens. Just fingers crossed that it doesn't blow up in their face. It did feel like a bit of an excessive cut. It makes me wonder where we sit with the cap. Like, did they even really have to do it?
Right.
Stuff like that does creep in your head, but I'm not going to say it, but it's a kind of like a trust the P, trust the, just trust what's going on here. Like, okay, we'll see how it goes.
I love Mitch Morse. I think there's a school of thought that he maybe the last couple of years especially was not as good as the name. And maybe he wasn't as much of an impact player on that offensive line as Bills fans wanted to believe. We shall see. I will say, Luca, and this may not be the best analogy. We've all been in those relationships before where it's not working out and you kind of get near the end of it and you break up with the person, but like right before you break up with them, they get this new hobby or they get this new interest in life where you're like, that's pretty interesting. Like, where was this the whole time we were dating before I lost interest in you? I'm, I don't need the Bills to like regret the Mitch Morse thing, but the fact that they cut him months after he went on McAfee and stole the show, like, where was that 4 years ago, Mitch Morse, when he goes on the show and he starts like, he starts making fun of McAfee's beef with the ESPN executive, and then he gets them all cracking up with him basically, cover your ears, folks, if your kids are in the car, with him basically being like, that fucker's never going to slide when it comes to Josh Allen. And they just all lost it. I mean, Mitch Morse, why couldn't you do that 3 years ago? It's like, now we're all like, holy cow, let's get Mitch Morse a microphone now that he's a Jacksonville Jaguar.
Yeah. Have fun with the nice long hair at your quarterback position now, Morse.
snapping balls to Trevor Lawrence to look down the field and see Gabe Davis not getting open. All right. Bills Mafia 27 with the last one here. Tyler Bass has to be elite this year, or else we should look for a new kicker this offseason. Fully agree. Fully
100%.
agree. I think that there's an argument that could have been made that the Bills could have been aggressive looking for a kicker this year, but Luca and I pointed out pretty early in the offseason process that contractually speaking, in an offseason where the Bills really had to count every penny, they would have had to take such a loss on that contract that you would have to be almost positive that this kicker was better than Bass to make that move. But I'm with you. To me, it's not just about like baseline kicking. I need you to be top 5 in the league, multiple high leverage kicks. We all saw what Harrison Butker did in the stadium in the playoffs, drilling 50-yard field goals like it was nothing. And then our guy, sails one wide right when the game's on the line. I need Tyler Bass, who it even feels like the makes it kind of like Luca described the wins at the end of the Bills year, where it's like you won, but it didn't feel right. Like, okay, you really needed like a last second field goal to beat Easton Stick. It felt like every time Tyler Bass made a kick, it was just kind of like inching in the upright.
Yeah.
I want to see him get back to some consistency. I'm fully aware that he kicks in some of the hardest elements in the sport, but he's making a pretty penny to be one of the highest paid kickers in the sport, and the Bills certainly value points, and they need to get back to feeling like they have an automatic 3 points every time they send them out there, because they have a unicorn at quarterback. And when you send your kicker out, you're taking the ball out of your quarterback's hands, and it's got to mean something. You don't want to Mike Vanderjagt to your situation where you're taking an elite offense off the field and the kick goes into the utility tent instead of through the uprights.
Burying the reason Peyton Manning doesn't have even more Super Bowls.
Yes.
Yeah, the image that is always in my head with Bass is not actually him following the Kansas City wide right. It's actually when I was in the stands for the Giants Sunday night game and watching him at halftime warm up and miss every single kick. And I was like, oh no. Like,
you texted me when that was happening, and I got so nervous. I was like, I want to tweet this out, or
like, I mean, he's missing 40-yarders. Like, it's like, oh my, his confidence was at an all-time low, and it really never seemed to recover. And there's no like actual thing we can look back on and be like, oh, he got, ran into at this date and maybe something happened in his technique and he was recovering ever since. It's like, just something happened psychologically. Something happened. Maybe he did pick up something and no one ever heard of it. But like, that's all I think about. And I need to never see that again. And hopefully, knock on wood, he does become money like he was 2 years ago, where you were singing his praises after you saw him in Detroit. The polar opposite. He was just banging and everything. You had the confidence in the world where you could have turned around and picked up another beer or snack because you knew it was going in. Like, that's where he needs to get back to. If he doesn't get back to that, yes, I'm with Bills Mafia 27. New kicker will be looked at come next offseason.
Funny story. I was in Detroit on Thanksgiving when Tyler Bass nails the game-winning kick for the Bills. I was so confident, Luca, he was going to make the kick, that when I'm watching it, I'm on the Bills sidelines, but I'm up higher. So like I can't tell just by watching the ball if it goes through the uprights, right? Like I either have to watch the refs or whatever. I didn't even watch the ball. I watched Tyler Bass kick the ball, and I just watched him because I wanted to watch him celebrate. I knew it was going in, so I wanted to watch him, make sure it's not blocked. But once it cleared the offense, I was like, I just want to see his reaction. And of course, he starts jumping around, and it's great. But yeah, I miss those days. And Tyler Bass has missed some pretty easy kicks, and it's time to get back to being reliable, because those in a game of inches, in a situation where we've seen the Bills lose by an eyelash, and I mean, look no further than their last playoff loss. You can't have kickers missing kicks. You just can't, especially the makeable ones. And Tyler Bass, you even think back to the 2020 AFC Championship game. The Bills go up 10-0 right away, but then it's only 9-0 because he misses an extra point.
Yep.
And just that, like, is that a huge difference at that point in the game? No, but like, this crowd has been waiting all day, drinking, partying to see their Chiefs go to the Super Bowl. And right off the bat, it's like Bills drive down for a field goal, fumble, Bills drive down for a touchdown. And it's like they are just looking for anything to cheer about. And the kick goes, and you miss an extra point, and it's like momentum's back in the stadium.
You gave them the okay, there's something.
Yeah. And now Mahomes gets the ball back, and like, F this, Luca. All right. Well, not F you guys. We appreciate you guys for watching. And this was fun. Going to be a fun week coming up. The Bills get the pads on Monday. Red and blue scrimmage is coming up on Friday. Luca and I will be back on next Monday getting ready for the Bills' first preseason game against the Chicago Bears. One final note for all of you. The Bills' preseason schedule has a theme. No, I'm not expecting you to know it because I just saw this and no other sane person would think this. It's the Mitch Trubisky Revenge Tour.
It is.
They play the Chicago Bears, then they go to Pittsburgh, and then they play Carolina where he went to college.
The Carolina is a bit of a stretch.
It's a stretch.
I like it.
It's the only other one you could do. I couldn't even think of another option unless it was like the Chiefs, who because Mitch, well, he was the first quarterback taken, so it's not like the Chiefs even passed on him. So yeah, it's the Mitch Trubisky Revenge Tour. And last time he played for the Bills in a revenge game in preseason, he lit up the Bears. So Mitchy Biscuits, we'll see what you got. Money Mitch. Those days are long gone. All right. For Luca, I am Josh McCarty. We will see you next time on Bills Chat.